Good morning. Breaking news now. Yemen. Protesters stormed the U.S. Embassy there this morning amid a new wave of anti-American protests in the Middle East. This after that deadly violence at the U.S. consulate in Libya. This morning, questions about whether that was a spontaneous uprising or a coordinated terror attack. Who is at fault? A police officer caught on camera dragging a 77-year-old woman from her car after a traffic stop.
I need back up. Oh! Get out of the car, lady.
Oh! But did her behavior moments earlier leave the officer with no other choice? And Bieber in. Ryan Seacrest talks to Justin Bieber in what could be his most revealing interview yet today, Thursday, September 13th, 2012.
From NBC News, this is Today with Matt Lauer and Savannah Guthrie, live from Studio 1A in Rockefeller Plaza.
And good morning. Welcome to Today on a Thursday morning. I'm Savannah Guthrie.
And I'm Matt Lauer, and we're following breaking news once again this morning. Let's take a look at these live images from Cairo, where security forces are clashing with demonstrators. It's near the U.S. Embassy, and it's happening for a second straight day. This after angry protesters made it onto the grounds of the embassy in Yemen's capital city overnight.
There are reports that the perimeter of the compound there was breached, an American flag burned, but we're told order has now been restored at the embassy in Yemen. Meantime, a U.S. warship has now arrived off the Libyan coast. A second is expected to arrive in the coming days. And overnight, President Obama called the presidents of both Libya and Egypt to talk about the response to the violence there.
Meanwhile, flags flying at half-staff at U.S. government buildings around the world for the 4 victims of the attack on the consulate in Benghazi, Libya, including Ambassador Chris Stevens. And there is political fallout as well. Mitt Romney taking heat from some members of his own party for his criticism of a statement from the U.S. Embassy in Cairo following the initial demonstration there. This morning, we'll hear what President Obama has to say about that, and we'll get reaction from Republican Senator John McCain.
But we want to get right to NBC's chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel. He's in Cairo for us once again. Richard, good morning to you.
Good morning, Savannah. I'm now overlooking Cairo's famous Tahrir Square. This is where the protests that were supported by the United States asking for democracy were taking place. Now, a very different scene. There is an anti-American demonstration, also clashes underway. In the corner there, that is the street that leads to the United States Embassy. And for the last hour or so, we've been seeing Egyptian security guards firing tear gas at protesters, trying to keep them away from the embassy walls. A very similar scene taking place right now in the city of Yemen, in the capital of Yemen, the city of Sana'a, where protesters even managed to breach the compound walls. Another assault on a U.S. embassy, this time in Yemen. Protesters threw stones at the embassy walls in the capital Sana'a. They climbed the gate, set fires, and raised posters denouncing a once obscure U.S.-made internet movie that negatively portrays the Muslim prophet Muhammad. U.S. diplomatic personnel in Yemen were reportedly moved to a secure location. In Cairo, more clashes, but this time it's Egyptian security pushing back. They fired tear gas to drive protesters away from the U.S. Embassy in Cairo. And the new Egyptian president rejected violence against U.S. diplomats in a televised statement and said he told that to President Obama in a phone call this morning. Wednesday night, in an interview with Telemundo's Jose Diaz-Balart, the president was asked if the new regime in Egypt is an ally.
I don't think that we would consider them an ally, but we don't consider them an enemy. They are a new government that is trying to find its way. They were democratically elected.
In Egypt, where these demonstrations started, the anger appears to have been spontaneous, as hardline Muslims were outraged by the anti-Islamic internet video. Libya was an altogether different story. That was an armed commando assault with mortars and RPGs on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. The attackers fought gun battles with U.S. and Libyan security personnel for 5 hours until the U.S. ambassador and 3 others were dead. U.S. officials say the attack appeared too well organized to have been entirely spontaneous. The Libyan government profusely apologized. Now Washington is hunting the militants responsible. Al-Qaeda cells in Libya are a likely target. Al-Qaeda recently threatened retaliation against the U.S. for its killing last summer of Al-Qaeda's second in command, a Libyan militant. Intelligence officials suggest killing U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens in Benghazi may have been Al-Qaeda's response, a shock to the State Department and his friends.
We've lost really a great statesman. We've lost one of the highest quality people that anyone could ever know.
As coffins of the American personnel were loaded on a plane in Tripoli, outside the White House, a candlelight vigil to honor the dead, amid promises of delivering justice. The clashes in front of the U.S. Embassy here are somewhat sporadic. They will have moments of intensity and then die down. They could become significantly worse tomorrow. There are calls for nationwide demonstrations to denounce any kind of American anti-Islamic stance. Those demonstrations have been endorsed by the political party of the Egyptian president. Matt?
All right, Richard Engel in Cairo for us this morning. Richard, thank you very much. Michael Leiter is an NBC terrorism and national security analyst. He's also the former director of the U.S. National Counterterrorism Center. Michael, good to see you. Good morning.
Good morning, Matt.
It seems now unlikely that the situation in Benghazi, Libya, was some kind of a spontaneous protest over that internet film. It seems much more likely that it was a well-planned military-style terrorist attack. Give me your thoughts on that.
I think that's probably right, Matt. The way in which these weapons were used, small arms, rocket-propelled grenades, and also that even once there was resistance, the attackers kept coming for many hours. This really does suggest that these were organized militants. Now, whether or not they were simply taking advantage of the disruption that was being caused by other protests, how long it was actually planned, what the actual motivation was, the film or otherwise, is hard to know. But this really does look different from what we've seen in Cairo and today in Yemen.
I mean, that's the real point. I mean, isn't it? In Cairo, the protesters showed up with anti-American banners, and in Libya, they showed up with small fire or automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades.
Absolutely. The common theme here is that there's obviously a serious undercurrent of anti-Americanism throughout this region. And with the Arab awakening, it's become much easier for that to be expressed. And we are so incredibly reliant on the security of the host nations, their security forces, to push back on this and secure our people. But there is this added element in Libya, which clearly was organized and intended to kill rather than just to protest and set small fires.
Well, let me ask you, the president has pledged that justice will be carried out in Libya, but given the fact that that country has gone through and is still in some ways going through such dramatic change, what are our intelligence abilities and capabilities in that country?
It's a very difficult environment for us to operate there, but we have many agencies there, the Department of Defense, obviously the intelligence community, the CIA and others, who will do their best to figure out where this might have come from. The FBI will also go over and do a forensic examination. And with that, we'll start to get indications of who might have been responsible. But ultimately, we still are going to be very reliant on the government of Libya. And thankfully, they have said and done all the right things thus far to pursue this and also secure our institutions in the future.
Michael Leiter. Michael, thanks for your perspective this morning. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Good to see you.
You too. It's 7:09. Here's Savannah.
All right, Matt, thanks. Senator John McCain was a key advocate of early U.S. intervention in Libya and a friend of Ambassador Chris Stevens. Senator McCain, good morning to you.
Good morning, Savannah.
Let me pick up where Mike Leiter left off. Do you believe that Ambassador Stevens was the intended target of terrorists?
I do. I think the indications of how this attack was carried out clearly indicate that that's the case. And I'd remind you, Savannah, that they just went through a very bloody conflict, and there's thousands of weapons in Libya. They have a very weak government. This is their first experiment in democracy. The Al-Qaeda elements are throughout the country. Their borders are porous, and so it makes for a very difficult situation. But a genuine American hero was Chris Stevens. I was with him on Election Day on July 7th in Libya, and they voted for a moderate government, not an Islamic government. The majority of the Libyan people are not the kind of people that attacked the U.S. Embassy yesterday.
I know, Senator, that Chris Stevens was a friend of yours. This is a diplomat who was experienced and did not seek out the cushy assignment. What would you want people to know about him?
Well, I think the American people should know that he risked his life daily as our representative in Benghazi during the conflict that eventually overthrew Gaddafi. He had a keen sense of humor. He loved his country. He loved the Libyans. And I want to assure you that the last thing that Chris Stevens would want today is for us to just withdraw, because democracy does have a chance in Libya, and that was his goal.
Let me ask you about the politics of this. This has wormed its way into the presidential campaign, and bear with me while I try to lay this out for everybody. In the early hours of this, the embassy in Cairo issued a statement trying to distance itself from that anti-Muslim film. They said that they condemn the continuing efforts by misguided individuals to hurt the religious feelings of Muslims. Mitt Romney, the Republican presidential candidate, seized on that and accused the Obama administration of basically apologizing for American values. Let's set aside the substance of those remarks for a moment. Let me ask you about the timing. Was it correct for Mitt Romney to seize on that political opportunity at a moment when the U.S. ambassador had been killed?
Well, first of all, the statement, as I understand it, was issued before the news of Libya came up. It was a very weak statement on the part of if you read it in its entirety on the part of the embassy that does speak for the United States of America. They later withdrew it as the violence escalated there. Look, what this is all about is American weakness and the president's inability to lead. Iraq is dissolving. Our relations with Israel are at a tension point. I'd like to see the President of the United States speak up once for the 20,000 people that are being massacred in Syria. There's an absence of American leadership in the region, and they are very weak. I'm saying that the statement that was made about the statement that was made by the U.S. Embassy was a very weak statement, and the object proof of that is they withdrew that statement and changed it later on. They speak for the United States of America.
Let me play for you President Obama's response to Mitt Romney on Telemundo, speaking to Jose Diaz-Balart.
I have observed that there's a tendency to shoot before you aim, as I pointed out, and that as president, my obligation is to focus on security for our people and not having ideological arguments on a day when we are mourning the loss of outstanding folks who have served our country very well.
Senator McCain, understanding that you do agree generally with what Mitt Romney said, did he miss the moment? Did he misread the moment that at a time when an ambassador was killed, it's a time to set aside politics?
It's always a time to set aside politics, but the feckless foreign policy is conducted by this president, who opposed the surge, by the way, and now with the loss of so many American lives, that we're, in the words of General Keane, that we've won the war in Iraq and we're losing the peace. The situation with Iran is such that the President of the United States will not even set deadlines. There is a belief in the Middle East that the United States is weak and withdrawing, and that's why you're seeing various countries and their leaders reacting, because they have to live in the neighborhood and they believe the United States is leaving, and this leadership is in a vacuum. And why the President of the United States won't help these Syrians that are being massacred as we speak is beyond comprehension.
Well, Senator John McCain, it's good to get your perspective, and our condolences on the loss of your friend, the ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's get a check of the rest of the top stories of the morning. Natalie's standing by at the news desk with a new do. Natalie, good morning to you.
That's the real news.
Good morning, Matt and Savannah. Good morning, everyone. A U.S. military strike on Iran would likely spark a major war in the Middle East. This, according to a new report from former military and government officials. The assessment finds that Iran would retaliate both directly and through its allies, and says that an effective military operation in Iran would be more demanding than the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan combined.